Hello all, welcome back to A Peek in Holy Meadows and welcome back to my living room. And today I just wanted to give you a few quick tips on how I personally prepare and study for my university exams. I also kind of used a version of this method in high school, but overall I just want to give you a way to structure your study routine basically. So this is basically my study routine that I do for all my exams. Just to preface though, I am a humanities major, so I do not do that much math. So I mainly do this for my psychology exams because in English we don't have exams, we just have essays. So the first tip that I will always recommend is handwriting your notes. Like I've always been an analog girl. Like I've always handwritten my notes. I'm not a big typer. Even my essays, I'll plan them out on paper and then I'll just type up the rough draft that I wrote on my hand, and I'll just type it up and upload that. But I am completely analog. All my notes are handwritten. I have many pens, many papers, many notebooks. I love analog just because I heard somewhere once like that handwriting your notes is better for memory retention, and I've personally seen that benefit to handwriting notes. Every time I handwrite my notes, I am able to memorize it and recall it, and I feel like it's very helpful, like test specifically when I'm like writing down the answer or like doing a multiple choice, and I can like recall to like when I was writing my notes and I can go back to that moment. So I just think all in all, handwriting your notes is one of my keys to success. So the first thing when preparing for an exam or a test is obviously attending lecture, attending class, and if you're virtual or asynchronous, keeping up to date with the pre-recorded lectures or Canvas slides or PowerPoint slides that are being put out by your professor or teacher. At the lecture, you're gonna wanna make sure to take note. I take notes, like I take notes on every word just because you never know when you're gonna need that piece of information that your professor randomly said. So I write down everything because especially like English too, like when my teachers are lecturing on like a novel that we're reading or a play, I write down everything because it makes it super easy to like write the essay afterwards. But like for exams, I write down everything because it's also helpful to give context to what you're learning, like class discussions or examples that are relevant to what you're learning. I always write those down because it's very helpful when you go back and review. So next step that I do is I read and take notes on the materials that are not the textbook. So if there's any PowerPoints on Canvas, if there's any supplemental reading materials, I will always read them and take little notes on them just so I have that extra knowledge in my back pocket if I need it on the exam. Because having that real world example of the concept I'm learning in my back pocket is really helpful for exams, because a lot of the exams that I take are worded in a way that you have to apply the knowledge. So it's not just like, what is the definition of this? It's more so like integrating the definition into an example and answering a question based off of that. So the next thing I do is I simply just read the textbook, like the chapters or the pages that I'm assigned to read. I only read those pages without annotating, without highlighting. I may like take a pen and like put a little dot next to something I want to come back and take notes to. But even then, I just try to read through for comprehension's sake, for learning's sake, to get the material in your brain, to familiarize yourself with it. And then yeah, so I usually read the entire chapter. I even read the chapter summary, and I set aside the book. The next thing I do after reading the textbook is I actually read over my lecture notes and the supplemental material notes just to refresh my brain. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I do this. The length of my studying is very dependent on like the time that I have, the amount of attention I put on a class and all that stuff. So I usually start this process like when the chapter starts, or when like after we take an exam and like we're doing a unit or like we're focusing on a certain amount of chapters, that's when I start this process. So the process begins with showing up to the lectures, but the actual studying and reviewing the notes happens like 2 to 3 weeks before the exam day. So I'm basically just constantly refreshing my brain with this. And I also incorporate my study routine into my deep work schedule, so it's all very, like, it flows really well. But yeah, I start this process, like rereading the notes, like 2 to 3 weeks before the exam, just to really cement in the information. After I reread the lecture notes and all that stuff, that's when I'll go back and I take the textbook, I'll highlight, and then from those highlights, I take them analog notes, like handwritten notes, and I put that aside. And then usually like a week or two before the exam is when the study guide drops. So then I obviously fill out the study guide. I try to use my notes and the textbook to fill out the study guide. But another great tip for study guides is working with people from your classes, whether it's through Discord or in person. I feel like that is such a good way to get a full view of what you're learning, because you're learning it from someone else's perspective and you're reviewing with someone else's knowledge, and at the same time you're kind of, when I review and like do study groups and stuff, it's kind of like you're teaching the person the topic and the subject. So I find that very helpful. Writing and speaking for me are like the ways that I cement in knowledge. I know I need to speak it and I know I need to write it, and if I do those two things, I'm set. Everyone is a little different. People learn very differently. Some people are tactile learners, visual learners, and all that stuff, but this is specifically for the girlies who need to write and speak. So after you've complete the study guide, you should have 4 sets of notes to study with. So you have your lecture notes, you have your supplemental material notes, you have your textbook notes, and you have your study guide. I know for some people you might not need to have that many sets of notes, or you might have more sets of notes, because not every class has supplemental materials, not every class gets a study guide, not every class even requires a textbook. So this is just like me covering all the bases. The final thing that I do, and this is 2 to 3 days before the exam and the day of the exam, I will read through those 4 sets of notes at least once. But if it's a really hard subject where I'm just not understanding the material, I'll do it morning and night for 3 days straight. And then for the day of the exam, I'll read the notes out loud in the morning and right before I take the exam, just to really like cement that information in. I know my study methods are pretty rigorous and very repetitive. I feel like reading, writing, and speaking, it versifies that repetition, but it also is repetition. So you're really instilling this information in. Another bonus tip that I would give is trying to recall information and applying the information that you learned from the subject out in your real life. So like with my boyfriend, I constantly will just like tie our conversations to something I'm learning, and for me that helps cement it, because on the exam I can go back to that moment where I was like making a joke or like explaining something to my boyfriend and brought that up and be like, oh, that's what that is. And for me, when I try to like spontaneously bring to mind like the things that I'm learning without anything in front of me, it helps me be able to call to the front of my mind those subjects and those ideas. Just another tip, just since I'm giving tips, I would say before the exam, meditate and clear your mind. I feel like when I go into an exam very clear and calm, I perform better. I'm not really pressed for time. I don't feel like I'm gonna get anything wrong. And another thing, go in with a positive mindset. People who complain and people who are like, I'm gonna fail this test, I'm not gonna do good, that makes me so sad. Like, I don't know. For me, overconfidence, I would rather be overconfident than super pessimistic. So that's the mindset that I go into. Like when I go into an exam, and because I put all this work in, I'm like, yeah, I'm here to get my A. Yeah, positive mindset, repetition, applying these concepts to your everyday life. And ultimately, I feel like if you're not understanding something, go to the professor, because they will tailor that information to your level. When I do go to office hours and I do ask for help, it is literally like put into words that are perfect for my understanding, and they can really meet you where you're at. Like I think a lot of people have this misconception about professors being super intimidating, but for me, like, a professor reminds me of just an older college student. Like, they're very wise, but they're also very, well, some of them are not that nice. But yeah, all in all, I feel like study habits is one of the most important things in college and even in high school. Being prepared for exams, knowing the information, and going in with confidence is really gonna boost not only your confidence for that exam, but your confidence in the classroom. I feel like this is really getting off topic, but I feel like since I've had that study method that I do and my study routine, I'm way more confident when I speak in class. I feel like I know what I'm talking about. I hope that my study routine can help you in any way or inspire you to create your own routine that is tailored to your needs. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Bye.